All right. So we always do this just to kind of
Yeah.
get our wiggles out. Yeah, we do. Vogue.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CMMC Compliance Corner. I am Orly Burlov. Well,
I am Noelle Vestal.
And I am Antonella Commiato.
oh my gosh, I just love the way that
I-
sounds.
Oh, I'm so jealous that my name isn't Antonella.
I know. I'm going to be Burlovia or something like that. This is the international edition of CMMC Compliance Corner. Antonella,
So are
if
we
you
doing
can.
this all in Italian then, Orly?
Yes.
Oh, perfecto.
Yes. Perfecto.
I will have no idea what's going on, but it'll sound really pretty, so I'm fine with it.
That's right. It'll be like an Italian opera. Yeah. Prego. That's Italian. No, we don't want to be guilty of marginalizing you because of your beautiful Italian accent. We actually brought you on to Prevail's Compliance Corner because we wanted to talk to you about some wonderful compliance topics, particularly ISO 27001. So normally here on CMMC days, we talk all about CMMC, the new things that are happening in the world of compliance, and don't necessarily talk about too many things that are orthogonal to it. But today, Antonella brought us the idea of talking about ISO 27001. So that's going to be today's topic. We are going to try and get this in 20 minutes. So let's get started. Antonella, so before we start talking about ISO 27001 and all its beauty, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you work, a bit about your experience.
Sure. So I'm the CISO and CTO at Extend Resources, where we provide information security compliance services to small to medium-sized organizations. I've been in security probably for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I was a Java developer for many years, and then solution architect, enterprise architect. And then, like I said, the last 10 years, I've been helping organizations with their compliance journey and achieving their objectives. So through that, I've gained a lot of experience with ISO 27001 because we are ourselves ISO 27001 certified. And then we help other organizations achieve that pretty nifty goal.
All right. So there's a lot of areas in which 27001, and we'll get into this a little bit later, how they overlap with CMMC. And so, the fact that we're talking about 27001 doesn't mean that we've divorced CMMC. We are still loyal fans, but we're kind of looking at it from a different angle. So before we kind of jump into things, why don't you just tell everyone who might not be familiar, what is 27001?
Sure. So it is an internationally known information security standard, super popular in Europe, but really worldwide. And it is all about establishing an information security management system called ISMS, or think of it as a security program that is designed to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information to a level that is acceptable to the risk tolerance of the organization. That's really, in a nutshell, what ISO 27001 is.
Okay. And just from the word choices, I can see a lot of correlation and overlap with CMMC, risk tolerance, creating a standard that's acceptable. And so, I know we do a ton of webinars here on Prevail. One of the things that we often get asked as a question to our speakers is there any reciprocity between CMMC, or will there be any reciprocity with CMMC between CMMC and ISO 27001? So is reciprocity for CMMC a thing at all? Like, is there any reciprocity going on between CMMC and other standards?
Great question.
Well,
Actually,
can't laugh. It doesn't play well.
Actually,
I can laugh. I'll laugh.
I'm one of the people that ask that question at all of your webinars.
So that was you.
It's me. So it's a great question because it depends on who you ask and when you ask it. Because I've been in many webinars
and today on October 10th.
So if you ask like implementers or the cyber AB during those town halls, the answer has been resoundingly no. There is no reciprocity. However, I attended a presentation about a year ago where Ms. Bostianich and Mr. McCoyne were attending that. And of course, they're the senior level of the DoD CIO, where actually the question was asked, and the answer was that Mr. McCoyne said he is a fan of reciprocity, including ISO 27001, and he felt like they needed to communicate to the Cyber AB that they were endorsing reciprocity. And so that for individuals like us who are ourselves ISO 27001 certified was like music to our ear, right? Because obviously it doesn't make sense to not take advantage of all the synergy that are between the two different framework and standards. And in addition to that, if you look at the NIST document, right, NIST 800-171, you go to Appendix D. I don't think it's by accident that you see the mapping of 800-171 to NIST 853 and ISO 27001. The one that is there is the version of ISO 27001 released in 2013. Last year, I think it was about October of 2022, ISO came out with ISO 27001 2022. So it's easy though to do that, to do the mapping from the 2013 version to 2022 version. I actually spent some time doing that. There is pretty quite significant overlapping. I think there are about 56 or so controls that if you implement 800-171, they're either totally or partially covering the ISO 27001 really Annex A, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. So I still have my hopes up that reciprocity will be fully endorsed by the DoD, and they will make that communication out to the Cyber AB. But yeah, if you Google Mr. McCoyne and then look at endorsing reciprocity, you probably find that there's some posts out there, and that actually there is the video in your website, because that webinar was hosted by Prevail.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you bring that up because it's like so many other things in CMMC where we have a lot of conflicting information. Like case in point, you have the Cyber AB saying, no, we're not doing this. But then you have the CIO of the DoD saying, no, that's a great idea. We should definitely do that. And we're not, there's there's some sort of miscommunication going on there. I think this is something that a lot of people in our audience are getting frustrated about, because this is just one of many examples like that. But I absolutely heard the same thing you did, Antonella.
Yeah.
And I have not heard anything since. Like there's been no other announcement,
Radio
no other
silence.
Radio silence. And I think part of it may be, I don't know if this is true or not, but part of it may be because of the fact that rulemaking for CMMC hasn't come out for public comment yet, and we still don't have revision 3 of NIST 800-171, which then that's going to come out, right? And NIST revision 3, I assume NIST revision 3 is going to update then, to ISO 2022. So are they just waiting? And I don't know if that's what the case is or not. I'm hoping that's all it is maybe after rulemaking comes, they'll be like, oh no, absolutely. Now we've got rulemaking done. Definitely have reciprocity, no problem. But yeah, we just don't know yet.
But I mean, if you think about it, right, it makes sense. I definitely don't think that they want to do work for the sake of doing work, right? So if you're implementing controls for one standard or one framework that are overlapping, I don't see, it wouldn't make any sense. One of the differences that we'll talk about the differences between 171 and ISO 27001, but 171 is more prescriptive, and ISO 27001 a little bit less, and so there might be some guardrails, some guideline as far as you need to implement the control. But I'm hopeful that there will be the full endorsement coming up.
So let's just talk about a little bit of what is the difference between NIST and ISO 27001. We spend a lot of time talking about NIST 800-171 here on the show, so our regular audience should be somewhat familiar. We talk a lot about the 110 controls and the 14 families and so on. Where is the overlap and, more importantly, the difference from in those two standards?
Yeah. So ISO 27001, think of it as being made up of two components. There is one component that is more operational, and they're like the management clauses, and those are required. And it's basically giving you the recipe on what do you need to do to implement an information security management system. These are things like you need to understand the context of the organizations, you need to understand your stakeholders, you need to have leadership support, and you have to demonstrate how that is happening within the organization, planning, operations, and things of that nature. So those are how to implement an ISMS. Then, which is that part that doesn't exist in 171. But then 27001 has what is called an Annex A. Annex A is a family of controls that really references ISO 27002. And that's where you really find the similarities between the two, right? Because they're both family of controls. One big difference is that ISO 27002 or Annex A of ISO 27001 is really covering confidentiality, integrity, and availability. While we all know that 171 focuses on confidentiality. So that's one difference there. And then I already touched upon the other difference where for achieving CMMC a level 2 or maybe level 3 certifications, you need to meet all the 320 objectives of the 110 controls, right, of 171. For ISO, is not that prescriptive. Basically, you have to come up with this called like a statement of applicability where you're defining which one of the 114 controls, if we're talking about ISO 27002 2022, 2013, you are going to be are applicable for your environment. And so it accepted that an organization might say, you know what, I'm not going to apply these controls. I thought about them. I understand the risk, but I'm going to accept the risk for whatever reason, right? And so as long as that thought process happened and is documented, you can still get an ISO 27001 certification, while we know that that's not the case for CMMC, right?
Definitely not. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. For NIST 121 or CMMC. So when an organization comes into an ISO assessment, so I know from a CMMC standpoint, you have to scope your boundary of the assessment. So is that kind of like what you're talking about with ISO, where this is what applies to us, this is what doesn't, this is where we want this assessment to be? Is that kind of the same?
Very similar there,
not?
right? Exactly.
Okay.
One of the very first thing that you do, just like is for CMMC, right, is define your scope. I think that's true probably for every single step, everything.
Right.
What are you?
One would hope.
One would hope. And so, absolutely. So you're defining the scope, and for ISO 27001, just like for CMMC, you can have like an enclave, right? Where is my CUI?
Right.
So for ISO 27001 is exactly the same thing. And it can be even down to a system, to a department, to a location. So you really define the scope, and then the certification is for that specific scope that you have defined. And so that's why when you're talking to vendors or organization and they tell you, oh, we have a ISO 27001 certification, always ask the scope. Because it could be on a system that has nothing to do with the system that you are actually purchasing.
Good question.
So always, that should be the first question. Show me the certificate.
Show me the money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew? Yeah, that's really good advice right there. I would not have known to ask that.
So
yeah.
So if I'm looking at both of those standards, the 27001 and the NIST standard, and trying to decide, if I should be pursuing one versus the other, does it make sense at any point to then kind of say instead, should I be pursuing both of them?
100%. And where it really makes sense is, for example, there are many organizations, right, in the United States that produce services or products for the DoD, but they also have clients in the in Europe, for example, right? And so what you're seeing, like in the EU, there is a lot more familiarity and experience with ISO. And I actually have companies that I work with that are being required to get an ISO 27001 certification because of a contract that they want to take with a company in Europe, but they also provide services to the DoD, and so they also need to have CMMC and soon, certification, probably sometime next year. And so when that happens, which is not uncommon at all, it makes sense to actually treat these two different projects as one because of all the intersections and overlapping that we talked about earlier. I have a lot more experience with ISO 27001 because I've been doing it for the last 10 years. But when I started learning about, CMMC and the objectives and the importance of having every objective achieved, I really like that. And even though ISO 27002 doesn't break down the controls into objectives per se, I found myself doing it that way. So I'm implementing it kind of how you're required to implement it for 171. And so, I mean, it's almost now, because now I've spent a lot of time on 171, to me, it's like, I'm thinking of it, they're two different things, but I'm thinking of them together and certainly take advantage of those synergies every time I can.
And that's something too to think about with Rev 3. So revision 3 for NIST standard 171 should be coming out, either by the end of the year or the first of 2024. And there are those sections in there now that are getting added back that were in the version 1 of CMMC and where procedures and processes and, making sure to manage, more of those organizational type procedures and processes, which are now, slipping back into revision 3. And when you're talking about ISO 27001, again, so it seems like there's even going to be more crossover than there is now in the next revision. So even more reason to just go ahead and take them on.
Yeah. So just as a caveat here, so I'm not sure even a caveat, but more, what type of opportunities would be available to someone who has both? I mean, I guess is there kind of like an overlap, or is there an advantage?
So, well, first of all, it helps you. Okay, so it helps you implement an information security program that is strong and robust in posture, right? Which is really a great thing to do. So the thing that is also really interesting is that we're starting to see states like Ohio, Utah, they're basically saying that they are considering safe harbor for those organizations that are showing due diligence into implementing controls, right, to protect the information. And so by having an ISO 27001 certification, or actually this legislation call out, if you have compliance with NIST 800-171 as being one of the ones that they recognize, if you've done this work, then we can see that you've done everything you could from a due diligence perspective, and we're gonna somehow reward you with less stiff penalties, or the courts are. Some courts are recognizing that. So that's a major plus in doing that. In the United States, of course, NIST is much more recognized than ISO when we talk about this type of things. And even the HIPAA, right? I think they have like there was a Safe Harbor Act that came out for HIPAA, where basically said if an organization shows that they've implemented like best known standards from NIST, that they also will get some type of safe harbor, because I mean, we all know, right, that we can be as diligent as possible, but there's no 100% way to eliminate risk. And so if it happens by you showing the work that you put forward, either with compliance or with certifications, it'll be helpful.
There's less of a penalty. I mean, I think that brings us very comfortably into the next point, which is the ability to even just save money on cyber insurance by implementing these standards.
Yeah, so for sure. So I think we all been a victim or receiving questionnaires, from insurance companies or from clients or RFPs, right, where we're being asked, what controls are you implementing? And so both having 171 and especially ISO 27001, because it also covers the IA, right, of the CIA, you can check those boxes easier, right, if you've gone through that work. And so then insurance companies are more favorable into either renewing your premium or lowering your premium, or even getting cyber insurance, because we all know that it's getting a lot more complicated with all the ransomware attacks and everything that happened, right? So it's definitely helpful that way. As far as the cost to doing an ISO 27001 certification versus an ISO in NIST 800-171 implementation, so I want to say maybe maybe ISO 27001 is a little less because for 171, if an organization has done nothing, probably takes about 12 months, right? Noel, that's kind of what in your experience too.
I think that's pretty accurate depending on the organization. If you have nothing at all, it's a lot to do.
I want to say for ISO, maybe 6 to 9 months. And we're going back to what I said originally, right? Because 171, you need to meet all of your objectives. I mean, of course, you can have a poem for some, but then you need to resolve it. For ISO, you don't. I mean, so there are 114 controls for the 2013 version. But if you, again, have a justification why you're accepting the risk, you still get your certification, right? So it goes a little bit quicker because not all organizations are made equal. And so for some organization, it might not make sense to have all those 14s and 114, and they can justify the reason. It's okay. So maybe a little bit faster for ISO, but they're just as involved. And it's work, but it's good work.
It's good work. You can have an espresso afterwards.
Exactly.
Or in between. A very
coffee and espresso.
There you go. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, Antonella. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
That I wanted to make that I think is important is about the certification cycle, right? So the similarity are that both of them will require external third-party auditors coming in. Both of them are on a 3-year cycle. But the big difference is that for ISO, you also have to have surveillance audit. So first year you get your certification audit, year 2 surveillance, year 3 surveillance, and then you start over. And so while for CMMC, I think you do it 3 years and then you do the self-attestations in between.
Yep, correct.
For ISO, you're going to have an auditor either remotely or in person, depending on what the scope is. Again, if you're actually also including facilities and offices and stuff, the auditor will have to be on site. But you're getting audited every year. Woo-hoo.
So is there any so there's no self-authentication or self-certification in ISO? All right. So it's a little bit more strict in that way.
Correct. Yes.
But I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, look at the situation that the DoD found themselves in the first place to make CMMC. As we all know, NIST 171, that's been in DFAR 7012 and in contracts since 2017. And there are still people out there who are like, I have to do this? This is still a thing I have to do? When they've been signing and saying they've been doing it all this time. So I do I do personally appreciate the ISO check-in every year just to make sure it's still getting done.
Sometimes to your doctor, right?
Exactly. You get your yearly checkup. Is everything still okay? All right. And we move on. I think that's a wonderful way to do it.
So it's not fun, obviously, just like it's not fun going to
Never
the
is.
But then afterward you feel better because you've done you did your routine checkup, right? But yeah, so the year 2 and year 3 audits are not as intense because it's just a past 12-month look. But when then you go back for the recertification, it's a 3-year look back. So,
yeah.
Anyway. But another interesting part that I want to make is we all know about privacy, right? Obviously, you can have privacy without security. Privacy legislation pretty much all over the world right now. Obviously, Europe has GDPR. And in the United States, we have a bazillion of them now, every state.
Well,
and
California, there's one as well, isn't there?
Where?
The California Privacy Act as well.
CPRA. Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah. There's one for pretty much every state has something about that. Yeah.
They said, so it used to be CCPA, now it's CPRA, and they said that's probably the most similar one to GDPR. I mean, they're different, but probably as far as intense. But what ISO did, which I thought was pretty cool, well, in the United States, of course, we have HIPAA, right, about protecting that information for sure. But what ISO did, which I thought was cool, so GDPR came out in 2018. In 2019, ISO responded with ISO 27701. And it's because it's 27701 because it sits in top of 27001. So obviously you cannot have privacy without security. So ISO said, get your 27001 certification, which then you now have an established information security management system. Once you have that, we now layer in top the privacy piece, which is the 27701. And now you can actually get a certification, which as far as I know is the only option to get a certification on privacy at the moment.
Yeah, I haven't heard any others. Wow.
That I know of. And it's not specific to GDPR. So ISO was really smart into basically providing guideline to be protecting the privacy of individuals, right? And so that could expand into even legislation that we have here that require to protect the privacy of consumer. And again, it's all about demonstrating that you're doing your due diligence, that you're taking the appropriate controls, and having that certificate in your hands is also helpful in case of a breach of PII or APHI or that type of data, which is super sensitive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Antonella, thank you so much for coming on Compliance Corner and teaching us all about ISO 27001 and how it overlaps with NIST, and how for people who are thinking about pursuing that level of compliance, where it overlaps with NIST and how it can benefit their business.
Excellent. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Ciao, everybody.
Ciao, ciao. Ci vediamo.
Ciao.
Arrivederci.